Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. And tonight I'd like to talk about an experience that many people have when they're embarking on a spiritual path, on a spiritual journey of self-transformation. And that experience is the feeling as though we are being tested or put through some kind of a trial on our path. I've certainly felt like this a lot, particularly in the last few years, and many other people experience it as well. So tonight I want to explore with you, am I being tested on the spiritual path? And just what does it mean exactly to be tested? How am I supposed to make sense of this experience that I'm going through? So let's get straight into it. So there's something very archetypal and universal about going forth on a spiritual journey and being faced with a number of trials or tests along the way. We see this in the hero's journey as put forth by Joseph Campbell, perhaps a bit of a oversimplification and generalization of the universal heroic monomyth, but true most of the time, I believe, and pointing towards some universal ideas of a road of trials that we must pass through before some serious transformation from ordinary human life to something greater, something transcendent. And we also see the idea of being spiritually tested very prolific in the stories of the lives of the saints, such as Saint Anthony, and also in biblical stories. And so people with a religious or a spiritual life often at some point grapple with this idea of being tested and this feeling like we are being tested. Some people might think that if you are on a spiritual path and you find yourself going through difficulties, it's just coincidence. It's not like those difficulties are there on purpose for the specific purpose of giving you a trial to go through. That's just life. But there is this element of meaning that we can attribute to difficult situations that we face on the spiritual path in the sense of being tested. But there's a lot of misconception about just what people mean when they say they are being spiritually tested. A lot of people hear the word test and they think of like an examination that you would go through in school or university or college. Like there's this challenging life circumstance that you will find yourself in, and depending on how you react to that circumstance, you will either pass or fail the test. And if you fail, you have to repeat again. That's not the sense in which the term test is being used when we're talking about being spiritually tested. If you look at one of the places where the concept of being tested like this is used most often, it's in the Bible, in both the Old Testament and the New. Being spiritually tested or having our faith tested is often described in terms of a specific metaphor, which is the testing of gold. This is different to a pass or fail test. This is actually a process of purification and refinement. So when gold was tested in ancient times, it would be exposed to a great heat, a great fire, so that it's melted down. And as a result of being put under this great amount of heat, all of the physical impurities within the gold would be burnt away, so that when the fire had burnt away all of the dross and the gold was extracted again and hardened again, it was purified of all of those imperfections. And so to be spiritually tested, like gold is tested, means that we are purified of the things which cause imperfection in our own nature, so that we can more easily express and more freely express the divinity that we hold within, which is the pure gold of our nature. And this is the gold of the alchemists. The type of gold that the alchemical texts of the Middle Ages used as a metaphor for our divine nature. But this is not just a biblical idea. The Roman philosopher Seneca was once quoted as saying, "Fire tests gold, and adversity tests the brave." So this was a man in history, a great man, a great thinker, so great in fact that he was the personal mentor and tutor of an emperor. And this is the wisdom that Seneca bestows, that we are tested as gold is tested, and our personality is refined as a result of that. And I'll go into exactly how going through difficult situations in life can be purifying later on in this video. But first we need to establish, if to go through a test is to be purified in some way, then what are the impurities of our nature, and what is the thing that is being purified? Well, as I've already kind of touched on, that which is being purified is our true nature, our divine nature, our conscious awareness, our sense of pure beingness, which is tarnished or contaminated by, or if you like, conditioned by our experience of being in the world, what Eckhart Tolle would call the world of form. So we have this state of beingness, this divine essence within us, which has a deeply felt intuition of the way that the universe truly is, that everything is one, everything is connected, and everything is having an intimate relationship with everything else. And there is this great blissful unity that underlies all things. But we also intuit that we have a sense of separation from that enjoyment because of something else in our nature, and we're trying to get back to that sense of joy, that sense of fulfillment, but we don't know how. And because of our ignorance, because we don't identify with our consciousness, but rather with the parts of us that are of the world, our personality, our ego, and we see the physical world as the only real world, we think of ourselves as an individual who's out for themselves, who can only find that enjoyment in the things of the world, and that never satisfies us, and that causes us suffering, and that leaves impressions on us in the form of memory associated with some kind of negative reaction. And then this causes us to have a bias as we go into new situations, and gradually a narrative starts to develop, usually negative, about the way that we interact with the rest of the world and the things that we want that we don't have, and we can't be happy because we don't have them. And we develop habits that can be based upon craving, which just keep us stuck in cycles of dependence and a lack of satisfaction. And we can develop beliefs, attitudes that reflect a certain bias, which is a distorted view of reality. And all of these things coagulate into our egoical personality, which obscures and covers over the truth of our nature, which is divinity. And so this then is the impurity which needs to be burnt away to reveal our true nature. And this is what being tested will do. Essentially, what happens during a time of great trials in this spiritual sense is that we have this desire to live a spirit-centered life. There is some initial realization that we are spiritual beings fundamentally, and we want to live from that instead of from our egoical nature. And we are beginning to take the initial steps towards changing our way of life to better reflect that self-knowledge. We come up against a lot of resistance when we do that, because the rest of the world is not like that. Most of humanity is stuck in ego patterns, and our society is based around the values of the world. This world, not the world beyond, not the transcendent. And even the laws of nature itself, the parts of us which have emerged from the most dense physical parts of nature, are working against, in some sense, those parts of us which aspire towards something transcendent. So there's this internal struggle with unbridled instinct and emotion and so forth. So we immediately find that we are in this battle. We are very much going against the grain. We're going against the tide of the rest of the world by choosing to live a spirit-centered life. And of course this creates difficulties. And this is why so many people see it as a test in terms of like an ordeal that they have to go through. Maybe more so than an examination. Almost like an initiation ritual where you need to endure great discomfort to prove yourself. And maybe there's an element of that, but where these ordeals become a test in the sense of the testing of the alchemical gold is we interact with other people and with the world around us with this newfound attitude. We want to act differently to how we acted before. And at first, we won't be able to. We'll slip into the old habits, but perhaps we will learn something from that experience about how we could be different the next time, because now we're going into that experience with consciousness and self-reflection. And so the next time we have the same kind of experience which challenges us, perhaps we will find a way to react or respond differently. And when that happens, a bit of the imperfection in our nature, represented by the individualistic ego, has been diminished, burnt up, you might say, as we struggle through adversity to find a different way. And under the pressure of that adversity, a change is forced. And then the other side of that is that we are able to expand the amount of reach that we can have with pure consciousness, the amount that we are able to express our consciousness. And so there is a purifying or a revealing of the gold underneath. So this is really what's going on when we're spiritually tested. Because we're spiritual beings, and we can have an awareness that our most fundamental core nature is spiritual rather than material, in the sense of being part of the greater divine reality that is the true nature of all things. But we can have that realization, but the reality is that we still need to be a part of the world. It's the only way that we can survive. There's very few people who can just go off and live in a monastery somewhere or in a cave in the mountains somewhere. Most of us have jobs, we have responsibilities, and we won't eat unless we can participate in the world. But we've established all of the negative egoical patterns that are encouraged by the way the world naturally is. And so we need to find a way of skillfully interacting with the world so that we can preserve that attitude of being in touch with our divine nature rather than slipping back into the way we were before. And that begs the question, well, how do we live in a way that's in the world but not of it, where we participate in the world but we are living and interacting with the world not from a place of egoical materialism but from our spiritual nature? Well, the key here is to think about the fact that there are, broadly speaking, two different kind of levels of reality. People talk about these sometimes as planes of existence or vibrational states or dimensions or the earthly and the heavenly realm. But really, what they are is two different perspectives on the same reality. You see, there's not two separate worlds or separate realms that are irreconcilable. Everything is one, but there are two different ways that you can perceive that same reality. On the one hand, you can perceive things as they appear to be, at a surface level, in a state of relative ignorance without investigating deeper into the nature of things. And then you can see things as they truly are, which is to see the depth of reality, to see the underlying principles that connect all of reality. And depending on whether you engage with the world as it appears to be versus how it really is, will determine the kinds of interactions that you have in the world around you. So, to illustrate by way of example, you might be on your way to work one morning and you need to stop by a shop to pick up a supply. Maybe you forgot your lunch or something. You need to go to a lunch bar, something like that. You need to swing by and pick something up before you go into the office at 9. You come across a shop. It's about 8:40 in the morning, which advertises that it sells what you're looking for. You approach the shop. Well, let's say there's two different people who approach the shop. One who sees only the appearance level of things, and the other person who knows something of the reality. This particular shop, the shop window has a sign that says closed. The person who merely sees the surface level appearance of things will see that sign and think, well, the shop's closed, I can't find what I'm looking for here, and they'll leave and they'll be deprived of the thing that they were looking for. But somebody who sees the deeper reality, perhaps because they are familiar with that particular shop, they pass by it every day, they know when it is and isn't open, perhaps they even have a personal relationship with the vendor. They know that however things appear, they know that the shop is always open by 8:30 on a weekday. And with this knowledge of the underlying reality, the second person thinks, well, that's unusual. I'll just go in and see if the place is open. And lo and behold, they find that The shop is open, but perhaps by some mistake the vendor forgot to turn the sign around. And that person, because they were able to perceive the underlying reality, will be able to get what they need and leave and be satisfied. Similarly, when we perceive existence, there is a world of appearances, which is the universe has no greater meaning behind it. It's just chaos and darkness and meaninglessness, and that's all that there is, where you've got all these separate parts which are their own thing, but they're all just kind of separate from each other. And then you have the reality, which is the divine nature of the universe. There is a deeper order to existence, and to understand that order is to understand the way that the phenomenal universe fits into the ultimate reality of the absolute, of the divine. And so that deep order is one of oneness, wholeness, totality, an integral relationship of the one with the whole, of codependence between things, relationship between things, the giving of one thing freely to another, and all of this occurring in a free-flowing, harmonious, balanced way. That, broadly speaking, is how we might understand the ultimate divine reality behind existence. And when you choose to maintain a spiritual identity in the world, it means to orient towards that reality and act in a way that is in acknowledgement of that deeper reality, as in the example of the person who goes to the shops. And so we change our behaviours to reflect that. We change our behaviours from being stuck in the same egoic cycles which get us nowhere and just make us go over the same problems again and again like a broken record. We go from that to living consciously and living in a way where, even though we're a part of the world, we are still living from consciousness, and we are living in a way, we are ordering our life in a way that allows the pure light of that consciousness to shine through us. And when we are tested, it is in order to effect that transformation in ourselves, which is often referred to as the cultivation of virtue. And it's hard. It's really hard. When you first start to go through a period of intense spiritual testing, the first thing that crosses your mind is, well, I've made this commitment to be a better person. I've made this commitment to live a spiritual life. I should be getting good karma for that. I should be rewarded for that by something. But instead of that happening, I find that my life is getting more difficult. How is this fair? How is this a fair exchange? And that's how we think about things. That's how we think about being spiritually tested when we have these misconceptions about what spiritual testing actually is. The reason why we're tested is simply for this reason. As I've explained, when you make a decision to live in such a radically different way to the rest of humanity, it's going to create resistance. And you're not going to be able to live differently straight away, because all of your old habits are very entrenched. Your old way of being is very entrenched. It's how you've been your entire life. You're not just going to read one book and suddenly be a swami. It takes practice, and it takes patience and determination to really reform ourselves into that more refined golden state. It's like if you have a great sculptor who wants to turn a unhewn piece of stone into a work of art, it's not enough for them to just say, well, I understand that this stone would look prettier as a sculpture, and I have the intention of creating a sculpture, so let this stone become a sculpture, and then suddenly it is so. No, it takes many painstaking hours of chipping away at one piece of granite at a time until at last the stone starts to take the shape that the sculptor has in mind. It's the same with sculpting our personality. It's the same with refining our personality. And in order for us to do that, we need to have lived experience. We need to learn how to put our new attitudes into practice. And the only thing that gives us an opportunity to do that is by being put into difficult situations where we have to react differently. Because you don't need to behave differently in the bits of your life that are easy to be in harmony with the divine. You need to behave differently in the situations that aren't easy. That is why we need to be tested. And it's not a matter of somebody giving us or sending us the tests. It's just the way that life is anyway. It's just that maybe we're becoming more aware of just how difficult it is and how fraught it is with ego traps, because we're coming at it with more consciousness. Although there is certainly also an element of just people in our lives perhaps not wanting us to change because they're so stuck in being miserable, because they're so identified with their ego, that you escaping that makes them feel worse because it reminds them of how miserable they are, so they'll try to drag you down. Or perhaps they see the new empowered you that comes from having that self-control, and they think that, well, I'm intimidated by this, I don't want this person to be better than me, so they will try and sabotage your progress and make you step back by deliberately putting you in even more difficult situations that will potentially trip you up. So there's definitely an element of just people being so unconscious and so insecure that they will try and sabotage you. They will try harder than normal to create negative experiences for you in the way they behave, because you've started doing the spiritual work. So there is an element of somebody's intention coming into it. But that's very different to, some kind of judge sitting on a cloud up there deciding this person needs to be tested. I'm going to send this fire and brimstone down upon them. Let's see how they handle that. I don't think that's a helpful way of looking at things. But I hope that the way that I've explained the phenomenon of being tested spiritually has helped you to understand this a bit better. It's something that many of us go through at some point on the path, and it's a sign that we're getting really serious in our journey of spiritual progress. So when that time comes for you, perhaps it has already, and that's why you searched for this video. I hope that what I've said tonight can help you. And if you appreciate what I've done with this video, please leave a like on it, subscribe to my channel to support my work. I will be talking more about some of the nuances of being spiritually tested in some future videos. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.